Welcome to the Dear NICU Mama Podcast. This podcast is a safe place to connect with other NICU moms by listening to interviews with trauma-informed medical and maternal mental health experts, remarkable stories from the NICU, and intentional roundtable conversations.
Our hope is that you feel like you're sitting across the table from another NICU sister and feel seen and validated in your experience. No matter where you are on your healing journey, this podcast is here to remind you that you are not alone. Welcome to the sisterhood.
Hello, beautiful mamas. It is Monday here as we are recording, but you are listening to this on a Wednesday, so happy Wednesday. Hello, Aisha. You had a jam-packed week last week.
Yes, I did.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I am just extremely exhausted, but I am so happy, and it was a great week. We celebrated Ava's 4th birthday. It feels weird to say 4 because she's just growing so fast, but it was awesome. She was treated like royalty, and she is. So it was amazing.
Girl, you made a castle.
I made it. It was epic. And it stood the test of toddlers crazy running around it and like diving in through the windows. Like, it was sturdy. I was so shocked that it did not collapse during the party, but we did it.
How long is the castle going to stay in your living room?
It is gone. It's not.
Oh, it's already gone.
It's not my house. It was my parents' house, so they took it down immediately after. They're like, the living room is back to normal. I'm like, oh, cool.
That's funny. Here, I thought it was in your living room, and it was just going to be up until Christmas.
Oh, I wish. I wish.
Well, so funny. Well, happy 4th birthday to Ava. We got so many messages from moms that listened to last week's episode that just found so much hope and healing listening to the episode. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, our last week's episode was all about navigating birthdays, and the mamas in our sisterhood shared some of the most beautiful and heartfelt and hope-filled and also just really real and raw perspectives of how it feels to celebrate a NICU baby's birthday. And it was one of my favorites to do as together. It was just, I was crying after each submission, truly.
Mine too. And it's just a reminder, no matter how far out you are from the NICU, it still is so important to get those reminders. Like, for me, it was so timely to listen to those.
Yeah.
Can't wait for the next one.
I know. Make sure you follow us on social media or are a part of our private Facebook group to get the first kind of announcement of when our next Mama's Call-In prompt is. But we're going to try to do them monthly because we're having so much fun with them. So, oh, awesome. Well, mamas, we have a very special episode today. We get to do a true NICU Mama story with the one and only Carolissa. Carolissa is a dear mama in the sisterhood because, well, first of all, she's a new recent team member. So virtual applause for that. We're so excited to have her on our editorial team. But our first connection with Carolissa up close was a letter submission that she wrote. And after I read her letter, I was like, yep, I want to get to know her more. She seems like such a beautiful and remarkable NICU mom. And I am happy to say that I was right. She is truly remarkable and beautiful and wonderful. And so we get to share her remarkable NICU story today. And so, Carolissa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm already crying. We haven't even started.
That's what happens when you get to spend some time with other NICU moms, just telling each other how brave we are and how much we just value each other. The tears just come.
I know. I was actually just thinking about how I submitted my letter on a whim. So it was around Elizabeth's 1st birthday, and I was having all of these feelings, and I was like, I saw the prompt. So the prompt was, Dear NICU Mama, from one sister to another. And I was like, I'm going to write myself a letter. And so that's how it started, right? And then I was like, you know what? I want to write this letter to the mama that's sitting in that NICU room right now, right? And so I did. And the thing is, like, I wrote it, and then I was like, I'm going to submit it, and I'm going to submit my pictures, and I'm never going to look at this again. It's probably not even going to get picked. And it was so crazy that it did. And it was, like her birthday. I think the day of her birthday was when I found out, and I was telling my husband, "Oh my God, I got picked!" And it just meant so much to me. Like
Oh.
it was, yeah.
Well, now I'm crying over here. So I think there's going to be a lot of that tonight. Um, and not to put you on the spot or anything, I tend to do this when one of our podcast guests like yourself has wrote a letter. I love to read their letter on the episode. So not to put you on the spot, but I do want to read because it was a beautiful one. And I'll also link it in the show notes where to find the link to her letter as well. But she wrote, "Dear NICU Mama, from one sister to another, I hope you give permission to truly feel like the resilient mama you are. The NICU is a scary place, quickly changing with many rules that often leave us feeling as a stranger in the room. But a mother is someone who is loving, selfless, and would do anything for their sweet little babe. NICU Mama, that is you." And the is in capital letters. "I hope in the midst of the chaos you remember you made those beautiful little toes and fingers. They know your heartbeat and you theirs. That smile that lights up your world, you made. You are their world, their protector, and their guiding light. NICU Mama, that babe is as resilient as you are. I know you're tired, sweet mama. The fight is a long one, but there is goodness ahead. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The NICU is a scary place, but it is also a beautiful place where miracles happen every day. Your little babe, sweet mama, is living proof of that. Love, Carolissa." And now we're all a mess. That last line, though, also a beautiful place where miracles happen. Your little babe, sweet mama, is living proof of that. So good. Well, let's dive in then to your remarkable story and kind of start from the beginning. So tell us a little bit about your sweet family and, was being a mom always something that you had dreamed of? What was it like to become a mom? Was there any babies before sweet Elizabeth? Tell us a little bit of the preview.
So there is a baby before Elizabeth. We have two girls. Sophia is our oldest. She is 4 now. With Sophia, I also had a preterm labor. I went to preterm labor at 34 weeks. We were able to delay it 2 weeks. I was on strict bed rest in the hospital for a week, and then I ended up coming home. Then we ended up having her at 36 weeks, and with her, we had a traumatic birth. So basically, she swallowed too much amniotic fluid and was not breathing. That was hard, because
Yeah.
I delivered naturally, so like she was right in front of me, and no, the NICU team was there. Everybody was waiting, and nobody was moving. She was just the doctor was just trying to get as much water out, and all you can hear was the water dropping on the floor, and we can see her. She was blue, like she wasn't responding. And I remember I was just like, I don't know what to do. Like that memory is forever engraved in my brain. And I just remember praying. I'm like, please, please, please don't take her. Please don't take her. And then she breathed. And as soon as she breathed and she let a small faint cry out, everybody just started moving. And they took her away. They did all this stuff. Luckily, she didn't need a NICU stay. So that was Sophia's story. We did get to take her home because she was constantly sounding like she couldn't breathe. Like she was so raspy, and she was like, all the time, and which was so scary because I'm like, I never knew if it was just the fluid or like,
Yeah.
But after the 4 months came, it cleared up, and then she was fine, and it was like, okay, maybe we can breathe now. So after Sophia, we healed from that
Yeah.
a
Right.
little bit, as much as we can. And then we always knew we wanted to have, actually wanted to have 3 kids. So I always knew that I wanted to be a mom. And we started trying again. And so we actually experienced secondary infertility. So I could not get pregnant for anything. And anytime I would get pregnant, I would lose the baby. So I had 2 miscarriages. Um, Both of them, one of them, it was early on. So like I went to the OB and I had an ultrasound, and then they had told me that the baby had stopped growing. The second one, I was further along. I was like 10 or 11 weeks, and I had already had an ultrasound. Everything was good. So I was going for a follow-up appointment, and then my OB told me that there was no heartbeat. And that was hard. Like
Yeah.
I literally just came home and sat on the couch and cried. I was
Yeah.
just like, it's like I see the baby, and that's also hard because you have to go back and like they have to make sure that the baby's not there anymore and all of this stuff. And it's just like, okay,
Yeah.
I was feeling very like this is not meant to be kind of thing. Um, and also I didn't understand what was happening. Like we got
Right.
pregnant with Sophia and we didn't experience any of this. So my OB, I had several consults, and she was like, secondary infertility is actually very common. It's common for you to not struggle and have a baby the first time, like trying to get pregnant, and then really have a hard time getting pregnant the second time around. I did not even know that was a thing.
Right.
So she's like, you can keep trying. We'll do more testing to try to figure out what's going on. We actually had an appointment at a fertility clinic when I got pregnant with Elizabeth, like
Oh,
literally like the week before.
oh my
And
goodness.
so I was like, because I told my husband, I was like, we both really wanted to have another baby. And I think for both of us, it was just that we wanted to have another chance to know that things would go normally. Not that we would know.
Right.
So we got pregnant with Elizabeth, and that was a wild ride. Sorry, I think I got away from your question.
No, you didn't. You're doing great. No, you're right on.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's all like really important parts of your story that we want to make sure to include. You're doing wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to, circle back to something that you mentioned of just, having the miscarriages on top of each other. How did you and your husband navigate that grief and really open your heart again to trying again? I mean, what was it like to get pregnant with Elizabeth and then just like, okay, we're going to go into those appointments? I mean, was it scary? Were you feeling like really hopeful? I mean, how were you feeling and how did you guys process getting pregnant with Elizabeth?
I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was completely terrified. I think that we were both on the same wavelength that I mean, we don't know what's going to happen if we don't try, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember the first appointment that I had, I was like, I cannot go by myself because the last time I was in that room, I had someone tell me that my baby didn't have a heartbeat anymore, and I was alone, and I was like,
Mhm.
I can't do that. Like, what if it happens again?
Mhm.
And so he actually went with me, and he's like, we were both like, no, I think we were both terrified.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it takes so much courage to open your heart like that again. I think that's something that is important to note of just the courage and bravery and vulnerability it takes to say, this is something that I deeply desire and that we both long for. And I'm willing to try. Like that takes so much courage. Okay. So you find out you're pregnant with Elizabeth and you go to the appointment and they say, baby's looking great. So tell us a little bit then about your pregnancy. Was it considered high risk because you had gone into preterm labor before, or were they just going to kind of watch you and, quote, like a typical normal pregnancy? What did they kind of walk you through?
So it wasn't labeled a high risk pregnancy
Okay.
because they were on the path that since I delivered her at 36 weeks, they were like, and I didn't have anything wrong. I had a normal pregnancy. I had no complications aside from having severe morning sickness. So they were like, the chances of that happening again are like slim, right? So with Elizabeth, so we had the first ultrasound, made it past that. It was great. I had severe morning sickness again, worse than the first time. Like it was so bad that I needed to go get IV infusions just to stay hydrated 2 times a week. And so I did that for the first 4 months, and then she was measuring a week in advance, like ahead of time. So my OB was like, "Oh, let's do your anatomy scan at 19 weeks." But up to this point, it was pretty uneventful, besides me, my face being glued to a toilet. So we went to our anatomy scan. So we had our ultrasound done. It took a little bit longer than usual, but I was like, we were super happy we got to see her. She was ticking and super healthy. We were waiting for my OB to come in, and we were so excited. We were talking that we didn't even notice that 15 minutes had gone by and nobody came in. So I was
Mm.
like, oh, that's super weird. We gave her another 10 minutes, nothing. So now I'm like, okay, maybe something's wrong. And my husband's like, no, don't go there. And so I'm like, okay, let's give her like 5 more minutes. If not, I'm gonna go out there and see if I can see her. And like we're at the 30-minute mark now, and I'm starting to get worried. And then she comes in and she has an ultrasound picture in her hand. And I'm like, okay, this is not good. And she's like, baby's fine. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, but your cervix is 75% funneled and it's short. It's measuring shorter at like 2.2. And I'm like, okay, English, please. And so she's like, basically your body's preparing for labor. And I'm like, okay, but I'm only 19 weeks. And she's like, right. So she's like, it's been taking me so long because I've been on trying to get a hold of the MFM. She's like, I don't want to keep you waiting. You're officially on bed rest. She's like, just go home, don't go to work, and I'll call you. And I'm like, okay. So like my husband and I are leaving and we're like, what just happened? Like,
Yeah.
so what does this mean, right?
Hmm.
And like, how much time do we have? She called me and met the MFM was like, well, because I was at 2.2, she scheduled an office visit like 2 days later. So we went to go see her and she did. So I had a male and a female MFM. This is important. We actually saw the male MFM first.
Okay.
And I went in, they did the ultrasound. I was actually measuring 1.8. And this was like 2 days later. So I'm already like coming shorter, but I was only still 75% funneled. And he explained that that's how the body prepares for labor, and that if this continues, I would deliver her within the next week or so. And so we're like, okay, well, what do we do? And so he laid out all of the options, and we chose a non-invasive option together because it was clear that if anyone like even try to check anything, that it would force labor faster. So we didn't want to irritate anything. So we were just like, okay, um, we decided to stay on bed rest and the progesterone pills, and then try to make it to 24 weeks.
Hmm.
That was the goal. We would do MFM appointments every 2 weeks with ultrasound and cervical checks, and then we would do every other off week we would do an OB visit just to check just to make sure that blood work and all of that stuff was fine. So every week I was seeing someone. So we did that. We made it to 24 weeks and everything
Wow.
was fine. I think it was at 1.7 still at like 24 weeks. So he was like, let's just keep going and see where we're keep everything as it is. So we made it. 26 weeks came and went. 28 weeks came and went. So actually at 28 weeks, they started doing an FFN testing, which tests for preterm labor. At that appointment, I was 1.5. And 1.5 was the measurement where he was like, all right, we can either put you in the hospital. Things tend to progress quicker from 1.5, um, or we can keep you home. And I was like, okay, well, if my FFN testing comes back negative, I want to stay home. I have a baby at home,
Yeah.
and I was already missing out on her life so much because I was on bed rest and I couldn't do anything. She started school and all of the stuff that I got to miss out on. Um, so we decided to stay home. At 30 weeks, we went back in, did the FFM testing, and they came back positive. And at this point, I was 1.3. So the progesterone pills were working to slow down the progression, but it certainly wasn't stopping it.
Hmm.
So at 30 weeks, he was like, I had the girl at MFM, and she's like, well, we're definitely gonna give you the steroid shots as a precaution. She's like, honestly, you could probably still make it to like 36 weeks. And I'm like, okay, because from what I'm seeing on the screen, it doesn't look like
Yeah.
it. And she was like, no, no, no. She's like, we see these things often. Everybody's different, but it's been slow progression. So she's like, just if anything, call us. Okay.
Mm.
So we went home. Got my steroid shots for her lungs, and at it was like maybe a couple of days later, I had some like bleeding. And so I called my OB and I'm like, hey, and it was very short, right? And so I was like, hey, this is happening. And she was like, all right, well, if you see anything that's like super bright red, call us, right? I told my husband, I was like, I don't think we're gonna make it to 36 weeks. And he's like, well, let's just see what happens. Like 2 days later, um, I had like a lot of bleeding, and I was like, okay. My husband had already left for work, and I called him. I was like, you need to turn around and you need to come back. And I was like, I'm gonna call my OB because he worked about 30 minutes away. And I'm gonna let her know. But either way, I'm going in. Like I'm
Mhm.
not gonna stay home. And so by the time he got in, my OB called me back, and she was like, "Come in." I was like, I'm already on my way. So she was like, so she met us there, and by the time I had gotten there, it had already stopped. Um, and so she's like, she's like, I want to check you. I know no one's done it, but she's like, all of these things. She's like, I need to see how dilated you are, if any. I was
Mhm.
having some small contractions on the monitor, so she checked me and I was already 5 centimeters dilated.
Mhm.
So she was like, okay, I'm gonna admit you for preterm labor. The male MFM comes in and he's like, I'm gonna check you too. So he checks me and he's like, I honestly don't think that we need to admit her for preterm labor. And so my OB was like, no, we're admitting her for preterm labor. I'm the one that's in charge, and this is what we're doing. And I'm like, okay, I'm with her, right? So they admitted us to preterm labor. Um, so we were there for 2 days, and then the goal was to make it 48 hours. I was in and out of active labor the whole entire
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
And on the second day, she was like, listen, we have done everything we can. I have one more thing that I am going to try, and this is medication that I can only give you 4 times every 4 hours. And she's like, after that, I can't, like, if you're still in labor, there's nothing else we can do. We have
Mhm.
to deliver. So I'm like, okay. So we did that. Um, and on the third day, there was a shift change. So we had a new nurse named Natalie, my angel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So she came in and she was very bubbly, and I was like, oh, I'm like, I'm a low maintenance patient. You probably won't even see me for the rest of the night. I'm like, I don't bother anybody. I'm just here relaxed, trying to keep my baby in. So she's like, yeah, I've heard. And she's like, we gave you the last dosage. So after this, if you go right, and every time after the 4 hours were up, I was right back into labor.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
she's like, this is the last time. She's like, sometimes when we do the last one, it like kicks in, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, because I was like, I'm a little worried. They haven't been working. And she's
Mhm.
like, yeah, sometimes it just happens that way. And I'm like, okay. So she leaves, and then we're heading right around that 3 hour mark. And so I see the contraction starting back up. And I
Mhm.
tell my husband, I'm
Mm.
like, we're not, like, we're gonna have to have her, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
Mm.
it's not stopping. And so she, like, around the 4 hour mark, my contractions are coming back regularly. Like, they're back to back, back to back. So she pops her head in and she's like, I'm watching you.
Mhm.
Mm.
She's like, I'm watching it. She's like,
Mhm.
I have you right here. She's like, let's just see what happens. She's like, you're not in active labor,
Mhm.
but she's like, they're coming closer together. So I'm like, okay, still like riding
Yeah.
the chain. So she's like, I told her husband and I were talking, watching a TV show, and then I just felt my water break. And I'm like, oh
Mm.
my
Mhm.
God, my water broke. And he's like, are you sure? So not even like seconds later, I don't know what possessed me to like remove my blanket, and I was sitting in a pool of blood.
Oh.
And I'm
Oh my
like, I
gosh.
literally looked at my husband, and I'm like, it's not water. And he's like, what? I'm like, no, I'm like sitting in a pool of blood. And he looks over, and he's like, oh my God. This is all within seconds.
Mhm.
Natalie walks in, and we're like staring at her. She's like, did your water break? And she's like, I saw this huge contraction. I was already on my way, and we're like staring at
Oh
her.
my god.
And she's like, what? And I'm like, I'm sitting in a pool of blood. And she walks over and she's like, okay, it's fine. She's like, I'm gonna change you. And she changes me and starts typing away on the computer. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, okay, she's like, don't worry about it, right? She's like, sometimes bleeding happens with when your water breaks. It's fine. It didn't happen the first time around, so completely news to me. So I'm like, okay. She's like, another nurse comes in, and I'm sitting in the same pool of blood again. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, this is like a lot. So she's
Mm.
like, okay, I think you might have had a placenta eruption.
Mm.
So she's like, usually there's a lot of blood with that. I'm gonna call the OB. I'm gonna let her know. Tiffany was the other nurse. She's like, she's gonna change you. So she changes me. She changes all the sheets again, and within seconds, I'm in the same like pool, and I'm just
Mm.
like, okay, I don't know about this. And so Natalie turns around. They just look at each other, and then Tiffany walks out, and Natalie changes the sheets again, and I'm like, okay, same thing. Within seconds, another pool, and I'm like, Natalie, and she's like, okay. I don't think it's a placenta eruption. She's like, your bleeding should have stopped by now. And I'm like, okay, so what's happening? She's like, I don't know what's happening. She's like, I called the OB. She was already in an active labor. So she's like, she's gonna come as quickly as she can. She's like, for now, we're gonna just I already called for the OR. And I'm like, you did? When did you even do that? So she was like, she's like, we're taking care of it. And I'm like, okay.
Mm.
So Tiffany comes back and she's like, she looks down at me and I'm sitting in this pool of blood again. She's like, okay, I'm gonna just change you. And then she looks at Natalie. She's like, do you want me to call the blood bank? And she was like, yeah. And then she tells her
Mm.
what my blood type is. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting goosebumps.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay. And so um, she's like, don't worry. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, we're just gonna change you. She's like, I'm right here. And I'm like, all right. And so within seconds, our room filled with nurses. They're
Mm.
like, one of them just took my husband and starts counting him for like the OR stuff. And he's in like this corner of the room in the back. And like they're putting in IVs, they're starting fluids. I'm like, okay, like Natalie, I feel like I should be worried right now, but this whole time she's been talking to me so calmly that I'm like, maybe I shouldn't be worried, right?
Right.
So she's like, I'm like, I feel like I should be really worried. And she just takes my hand and she's like, do I look worried to you?
Mm.
And I'm like,
Oh.
no. And so she's like, then you don't have nothing to worry about. She's
Mm.
like, as long as she's like, when you see me panic, you panic.
Mm.
And she's
Oh.
like, I'm not panicked. I'm calm. And I'm like, yes. And she's like, then you stay calm. She's
Mm.
like, I am going to be right by your side. I'm not going to leave you. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, where's my husband? And he's like in this far back corner. And he's just like, he just smiles at me. And he can't even come to me because the room is just packed with nurses and everybody has a job
Yeah.
and everybody's moving. No one's saying anything.
Mm.
Right.
Um, so she called my OB again, and I heard Natalie say we're running out of time. And I'm
Mm.
like, okay. So she was like, and my OB was like, check her. She's like, check her, see how dilated she is. So she checks me, and I was at a 7.
Mm.
Mm.
Um, and she is on, like, my OB is on the phone, and she's like, yelling, like, talking to her through it, like, somebody else is holding the phone for her. And she's like, she's at a 7. My contractions were every, like, I don't even know. They were, like, back to back to back. And so she's like, she's like, I'm gonna be right there. So she hangs up, and my OB literally not even 2 minutes later walks in, checks me again, and I was already 9 centimeters dilated.
Mm.
So she was like, okay, this is moving fast. So she's like, the OR wasn't ready at the time. So they're like talking, trying to decide what to do, and I'm just like, what is happening right now? Like,
Yeah.
how is this? It's like a movie.
Mhm.
I'm like,
Yeah.
this is not. How is this even real?
Mhm.
And so I'm still looking for my husband who's still in the corner, just like
Smiling.
literally back against the corner, just like smiling. He's like, everything is good.
Mhm.
So right as my OB is like deciding like what to do, mind you, this is all in a matter of like 2 minutes happening.
Right. Yeah.
I just remember her going, okay, and then all of the monitors starting to go off.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
so Elizabeth went into distress. I started shaking and like my blood pressure
Mhm.
like skyrocketed and my heart rate skyrocketed. And
Mm.
all I remember her yelling was go.
Mhm.
And like we were out of the door. And so we were rushing out of the doors. And you know in the movies where you see like the lights just like running
Oh.
Yeah.
through the hallways where like that's literally all I saw. And I was like, I was shaking. I couldn't control anything. I didn't know what was happening. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die.
Mm,
Like, I'm going to die.
Mm,
Like, I was like, I cannot believe this.
mm,
And
yeah.
so, like, how did we get here? How does this happen? Um, and I'm like, okay, what can you control? And I was like, okay, I can control my breathing. Um, focus on the
So wait, wait,
lights.
wait, wait,
So
wait, wait,
just,
wait. You talked yourself down in this moment like
yes,
that?
literally, I'm like talking to myself.
Okay,
I'm like,
I don't know how you did that.
I have to say, I'm listening to your story, and I am just the whole entire time thinking, Carolissa, you have shown from the very beginning this, I want to say, like, just this like stability as you're sharing it. It's just so evident to me that you have this instinctual
Mhm.
response the entire time that has kind of guided you throughout this, even when you don't even know what's going on, when things are happening so fast, when you're going from opinion to opinion, like through it all,
mhm,
I've just recognized that you have had this motherly instinct so present the entire time. And even in this moment, that you can talk yourself down and like return to yourself, and that's just, it is remarkable. And just wanted to say, like, wow, I am just so blown away by that, and it's just, it's truly incredible. Wow.
thank you. It's good to hear that.
Oh,
Absolutely.
girl, it's like you fought for Elizabeth the
Mhm.
moment you found out you were pregnant with her. Like,
Oh yeah.
literally, the way that you were able to channel yourself
Mhm.
and just, like, ride the waves that came your way is how you fought for her. Like, it's truly in that moment, like, you were like, "I'm still fighting for you, girl. Like,
Mhm.
we're going in this together." Like, the way that you were able to talk yourself, I'm just, like, in awe.
And also, like, to like commend your husband too, who seems like has was such a support for you through the entire thing as well. Always just kind of right behind you saying, whatever you say, mama.
I actually asked him later, like, you know, after I was like, were you like freaking out? Because you were like smiling at me. And he was like, oh, I was 100% freaking out. He's like, I had no idea what was happening, but I knew that if you saw me smile, you would be
Right.
like, okay, right?
Oh,
This is okay.
Oh,
so sweet.
wow.
So
So you get to, going back to the story, so you get to like you're
Oh, yeah.
controlling your breath. You're saying, okay, like this is what I can do right now. And then
Yeah, so I was staring at the lights flying by me, and I was like, okay, I can control my breathing. Okay, I can do that. So I was like, breathe in, breathe out, and then I'm like, what else can I do? And then I was like, well, I can pray, right?
mhm,
And so I did that. I was like, I can pray, and I just remember just being like, Elizabeth needs me, right? Like I was like, Elizabeth needs me. Sophia needs me. She can't. She's only at the time she was only 3. I'm like, she's 3. Like she can't be without a mom.
mhm,
mm,
And then I was like, it's just my parents and like, and my brother. I was like, I don't want them to be alone. I want my husband to be alone. I was like, he can't be a girl dad by himself. Like, and then I was like, he wouldn't even survive this,
mhm,
right? Like, and it was just so crazy. Like, and all of this is happening like within like minutes, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
and so I was like, please just don't, like, I'm not ready.
mhm,
I'm not ready. I want to meet Elizabeth. I want to have my family together. Um, and so we get into the OR and everyone is like, they're anesthesiologists and the OR team is there waiting for us. The NICU team is there. They transfer me over to the OR bed, the table, and then everybody's like, they're fixing everything. The monitors are still going off like crazy. I'm still shaking like crazy.
Mm,
And I remember, I guess like Elizabeth's heart rate was like starting to kind of like stabilize. And so the anesthesiologist made a comment about that. He's like, oh, baby's heart rate is like, starting to stabilize. But I was still like
mhm.
super like heart, like high blood pressure and everything. And my OB was like, okay, well, what about mom? And he's like,
Mm,
I just remember her snapping and being like, well,
yeah.
what about mom?
mhm,
I care for both mom and baby. It's not just about the baby. I was like, okay, she's not gonna let me
mhm,
die. And her saying that just was like so affirming to me. Like, okay,
Yeah.
she's gonna take care of me, right? Like,
Yeah.
she's not just going to like save Elizabeth and like not
Yeah.
save me.
Yeah.
So right before they are supposed to start the C-section, she has to say this phrase. So she's starting to say it, and then everything just stops.
Mm.
The monitor stopped beeping. I stopped shaking. The labor stopped. I stopped bleeding. Like, and she literally has her hands up. She's like, "What is happening?" And they're like, everybody's like staring at the monitor. So like, everything's fine. Like, she's like, her heart rate's fine. Her like, she's starting to stabilize. Baby's fine. So she's like, okay, well, let's hold off. She's like, I don't want to do a C-section if we don't have to.
Wow.
And so everybody's like kind of like staring at each other in shock. And so like after like 10 minutes, it was like, okay, it really stopped. So she was like, how do you feel? And I was like, well, I am extremely cold. And she's like, okay, well, you lost a lot of blood. So they have this thing called a bear hug, which is this huge, like, literally it's like two bare arms that cover
Oh
you
my
and like warm you up. So they did that. She's like, we're gonna warm you up. And then she's like, do you feel fine other than that? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not in pain. I'm not in anything. Like, I feel fine. Um, and so she's like, okay, I think we're just gonna wait and see what happens. We're not gonna do anything. And I kid you not, for the next 3 hours, nothing
Wow.
happens.
Oh my
Nothing
gosh.
happened.
What?
My OB was like, I kid you not, I've been practicing for 30 years. I have only seen this once before, and I couldn't explain it then, and I can't
Oh
explain it
my
now. She's like,
goodness.
I cannot tell you what's happening. She's like, I didn't think we were going to make it. I made a choice to come into the OR because this was the best place to save your life.
Mm.
But she's like, I did not think, I didn't know if we were gonna make it or
Mm.
you were gonna make it here.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, well, we're here.
Mm.
And we're alive.
Wow.
Natalie did not leave my side. She was by my right side the entire time.
Wow.
Mm.
So my OB's like at the 3 hour mark, she's like, okay, this is gonna sound crazy, but we're gonna have to induce labor.
Oh
Oh my
She's
wow.
god.
like, just 3 hours ago, she's like, oh, we were doing everything to stop it, and now I cannot believe that I'm telling you we're gonna have to induce labor. She's like, she's not gonna be able to be in there much longer with the amount of fluid that she has left.
Mhm.
So I'm like, okay. So she induced me. Labor started back up. Within like 15 minutes, the NICU team came back down. Everybody came back in. I delivered her naturally, and
Wow.
she was pink.
Mm.
She's like, and I didn't even like want to look because I was like,
Yeah.
I was so
Mhm.
petrified that she would like not be breathing or like that
Yeah.
she would be blue. And my OB, because we had so much time, we had told her about our experience with Sophia, and so I didn't look. I was just staring at the ceiling, and she was like, "Look at her." She's like,
Mm.
"Look at her. She's pink."
Oh. Oh.
And I'm like, "Oh," I was like, "Is she?" She was like, "Yeah." She was like holding her up,
Oh.
and I'm like, "She is pink." And then she cried, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, she's
Oh.
crying."
Oh.
So
Um,
redemptive.
Yes.
yes,
Absolutely.
and I'm like, okay. So I had read that I wouldn't be able to see Elizabeth, right? Because I was like, all right, I'm not gonna be able to see her or hold her or anything like that. But I guess she didn't need any respiratory help, so they brought her over, and she was like, "Do you want to hold
Oh.
her?" And I'm like,
Oh.
"I can hold her," and she was like, "Yeah, but only for a minute." And I'm like, "Okay." So like she puts her on my chest, and I'm like, "Oh my
Oh.
gosh, I want to hold you." And then
Oh.
and like the whole time, I'm like, "We did it, right? Like
Yeah.
we did it." And I'm like, "You're here, and you're pink."
Oh.
And I remember just being like, I need you to just to fight, right? It's your turn, right? And I was like, I'm about to cry. I'm like, we can do this, okay? And then the timer goes off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it was you timed me.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, I can only do a minute. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, no, it's okay. She was like, we need dad to come with. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And so I had to go back to recovery because I had lost so much blood. So they're like, we need to observe you for the next couple of hours. So I stayed there for a couple hours, and then I got sent to my actual room, and then my husband came like hours later and met me in the room, and I couldn't go anywhere because I couldn't walk and I couldn't do anything. I'm like, wait, like I want to go see her. Um, so I like told the nurse, I was like, how long do I have to wait? And she's like, you know what? If you can get out of the bed by yourself without any assistant and you can walk to the bathroom and come back, then you can go. And I'm like, okay, fine. So that was my whole thing. I was like, bet, right? So I started doing that until I could like walk by myself and it was fine. And so she's like, I can wheel you down there. And I'm like, no, I want to go by myself. Like, I want to be by myself when I see her. And she's like, okay. So she's like, I'm telling you though, if anything happens, you're not going to be able to see her for a longer period of time. And I'm like, okay. So I literally like a crazy person. I had like a hospital gown on and I put another one to cover my back. And then I walked to the NICU because it was on a different floor.
Oh my goodness.
So I got to her room and her nurse was like staring at me and I'm like, I'm mom. Hi.
Hello.
And then I was like, can I go in? And she's like, yeah. And that is so crazy. Like, just the fact that you have to ask permission to do anything, you know, and it's like, it's your baby and you have to ask permission to even walk into the room.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, you can go ahead. So I remember just seeing her in like the incubator and I'm like, okay, you're still alive, right? And I was like, hi, baby. And she's like, after like I was in there for 5 minutes, she comes in and she's like, do you want to hold her? And I was like, can I hold her again? And she's like, yeah, you know, kangaroo care is really good, like for the babies. And she's like, and that's probably if you're sitting. And I'm like, did my nurse call you? And she's like, so I got to do that. And she kind of walked me through like the NICU again. She's like, you know, the first day they have so much adrenaline. So she's like, don't be freaked out if tomorrow you see her and it's different. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you know, didn't even think anything of it. I spent some time with her. I went back upstairs and I was like, okay, I was exhausted. I was like, I need to rest. But it was like, I felt like I could do that now because I got to see her in her room.
Yeah.
And so I did that. The next day when we came to see her, she was like completely different. Like she was covered with all of these lights. We weren't allowed to touch her, and the same nurse was there, and she's like, yeah, overnight, we ran some tests, and she had jaundice like really bad. She's not responding as well. So they had like all the lights on her and all this stuff, and she's like, remember what I told you? The NICU's a roller coaster. So she's like, all the adrenaline is starting to wear off, so she's really starting to feel all of the things that are happening. Right? Her lungs are really underdeveloped. Everything is. So she's like, it's just gonna take some time. And I remember just listening to her, and then I felt like all of my like positive thinking was like going out of the door. Because then at that point I was like, this is too much, right? And it was almost like unfair in a way, because it's like we fought so hard to bring you here, and it's like we're finally here, and then it's like,
yeah,
there has to be a positive ending, right? And that was really hard seeing her like that. But yeah, that was my birth story.
Yeah. Oh my goodness,
girlfriends. We have to do 2 parts.
Yeah.
I decided.
Yeah. You have. Yeah, I have. I felt like I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. What a story. And just what you were saying at the end of just, you know, you feel like you did it. You're at the top of the mountain. You've made it. And then it's almost like feeling like, how are we back to not doing well, and that whiplash, right? How can I be up here and all of a sudden reality sinks in? And I feel like sometimes we have, as moms, just hope that it's going to be different, right? We know the stats, but our story is going to be different, and we're not going to need to worry about all that stuff that they warn us about because it's different. And then when that doesn't happen, it can feel almost like a failure. Like that's not how it was supposed to be. You know, again, that like whole, like you have this image in your heart and your mind of how you want things to be. And then when they don't happen that way, like, yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. It's very healing in a way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To be able to share your story. I'm like to share your story, my story.
Right. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was seeing her like that was super heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Also because it's out of my control, right? There's nothing that I can do to fix it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's also heartbreaking because it's like, well, what can I do? And they're like,
Nothing. Yeah.
can't do anything. And I'm like, okay, how do we just go from beautiful things to crying, and I can see you and I can hold you to like this?
Mhm.
Like, how did
Yeah.
how did we get here?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, it was
Yeah.
Mm.
it was hard.
Yeah,
Yeah. It is.
absolutely.
Well, I think as NICU parents too, when we see them in the NICU for the first time and they have maybe like one of their quote like setback days or setback moments, it's the first time, like you said, Carolissa, like you realize that there's nothing we can do. They're no longer like in our body anymore. They're no like, I feel like when you're pregnant and you get like a diagnosis or like a, okay, we need to like hold on for a little bit longer, you muster up all your might and you're like, okay, I can do this. Like I can, talk myself through it. And then all of a sudden, like they're apart from your body now. And you're like, wait, I can't protect you in the way that I could, yesterday
Mhm.
or the day before. And it's like you said, you just kind of have to watch and be present. And that's all you can do. And that lack of control is terrifying. And you would give anything to switch places.
Mhm.
Yeah, and on top of that, the guilt that you couldn't protect them longer, or
Yeah.
as long as society tells you you're supposed
Yes.
to
Yeah.
Yes.
do so. Yeah, that's also hard.
Mhm.
I mean, for me,
It's
it was a double whammy because I wasn't able to do it for Sophia. So it's
Mhm.
like, okay, well, I failed twice,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
yeah.
Um, and that's like super hard. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I remember like I would literally just walk back and forth from her isolate and I would be like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm
Mhm.
so sorry. And then it's just like, and I did that for such a long time. And I was just like, I had a nurse. I think she just heard me one day, and she just
Mm.
came in and she was like, "You know the way you're feeling right now?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "It's not your fault." She's
Mm.
like, "You can't change what happened, but," and she's like, "And no one's gonna understand how you feel right now, and that's okay." She's like, "Don't stay there. Don't stay in this negative mind space because then you won't be able to help her." And she's like, "This is temporary. Try to look for the good things in the NICU."
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I remember just staring at her and I'm like, good things?
Mhm.
You're crazy. But I am so grateful for her because I actually saw her a lot in the beginning. Um, and she would always be like, remember what I told you?
Mhm.
And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, I remember.
Mhm.
And she was very helpful. Like those words were very helpful for me.
Well, I want to give you a hug. I wish I could go across the screen and bear hug you with Aisha. I wish we could be the bear hug
Yeah.
arms in the delivery room too. Just that kept you warm. I wish we could be bear hug
Yes.
arms. But wow, I think Aisha said it best when she just talked about that instinctual mother inside of you, and it was evident through the moment that you were pregnant with both of your girls. And it's just hearing the ways that you fought and persevered and stayed calm throughout just a very wavy experience of just like many ups, many downs. Oh wait, we're gonna wait 3 hours now when 5 seconds ago we were maybe gonna be like delivering via an emergency C-section. To the way that you walked to the NICU and were like, nope, I'm doing this. I mean, all of it is truly remarkable. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's not every day that we relive it out loud. And we, it's like, as we talk about it, you remember different aspects of like, oh yeah, I remember this. I remember how it felt. I remember what was going, even just like sometimes talking about the way that our body was shaking. It's like you can start to feel residual of like, oh yeah, like that happened to us. And so thank you for diving back into those beautiful and also really scary moments of your story. And I know I've already read something on this podcast today, and I'm so sorry, but I want to read one more thing because as we kind of ended, you mentioned about that failure that so many of us feel. For preemie mamas, it's oftentimes that we weren't able to be that safe place that we longed for longer, right? The goal of full term just wasn't possible for us. And for full term moms, it's that reality that after they're born, we can't always protect them in the way that we desired to and that we wanted to. And so we have a post that we share frequently because we all need the reminder often, even 4, 5, 6 years out of our experience. But it's all about changing that narrative from my body failed to my body survived. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just read a really quick little gentle reminder as we close out the episode. But it goes like this. We say, we talk often about the unique relationship many NICU mamas have with their postpartum bodies. For preemie NICU mamas, it can look a lot like a relationship mixed with gratitude that it was their baby's first home and grief that it couldn't carry their baby full term. For full-term NICU mamas, it can look like a relationship mixed with gratitude that their baby was able to carry them full term. Their body was able to carry them full term, but grief that it wasn't enough to sustain them immediately after birth. So sweet mama, tonight we want to remind you that your body did absolutely everything it could to not only protect your baby, but also to protect you. You are a survivor. Oftentimes in an emergency delivery, the delivery not only saves the baby, but it also saves the mother. And when we take a step back, we can see that your body was using all of its resources to try and protect the both of you, both during and after birth. We know it's so hard to believe it now, but your body is not against you. As you heal and as you grow, just remember that you are never alone. Your body did not fail. So mamas, let this be a reminder to all of you listening today that have felt that feeling of, if only I could have done more. We want you to know that your body did enough. Mm-hmm. Your body did the most. Mm-hmm. Your body did not fail. Mm-hmm. So we will be back next week with Carolissa's remarkable part 2. We have a NICU journey to talk about and life at home. Mm-hmm. There's so much more to cover. So Carolissa, thank you again for sharing part 1, and we'll be back next week with part 2. Thank you so much for listening to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. If you loved this episode, we'd be so grateful for a review.
For more ways to connect with the Dear NICU Mama sisterhood, check out the links in the episode description.